back when Marriott announced they were getting to homes and villas, we thought would really drive the needle for the industry as an alternative place for listing our inventory. And I think there was a lot of hope or all these promises. And to date, they're at 115,000 listings. That is it, compared to Airbnb, which is 6 million listings. And I am just so confused because they were on two of our markets and the numbers that they were producing were abysmal. So we disconnected the feed. What does Marriott Home and Villas remind you more of? TripAdvisor or Pertinier?
Prepare to enter the line of fire. You're tuned into Straight Fire VR, the source for vacation rental news. We give you straight takes on what's really happening in the short-term rental world. Shooting straight from the hip today, we have two guests: Amy Hinote, editor and founder at VRM Intel, DARM Conference, and Vacation Rental Women's Summit, as well as Amber Carpenter, vice president of product at V-Trips, adjunct professor at both Brown University, Oregon State University. On Safety Watch is our co-host Miriam Ramsey, Regional Director of Business Development at V-Trips. I'm Heather Macias Milo, Executive Producer. Our host Steve Milo is ready to serve up the latest news, and he's happy to dish on the latest data. Ready to get served? Steve, ready fire.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, everyone. And I have to start this episode in particular with a virtue signaler warning. This is not going to be an episode if you don't like pithy humor, talking about maybe competitors and some of the mistakes they made. This is definitely not going to be an episode for you. But we are going to be talking with Amy Hinote and giving her some time to talk about her upcoming DARM, which is the first one in 2 years, and the Women's Summit. And both Miriam and Amber Carpenter will be at the Women's Summit. And Amber Carpenter and Chad Blankenship will be at DARM. So, but what I thought would be fun, because, you know, we don't get together that much, is we're going to have a meal. And we're going to have a couple appetizers, then an entree, and then dessert. So I know everybody, Heather in particular, likes appetizers. So the first appetizer I want to start with is Airbnb. And so just to give you some context, this is not a startup company anymore. This is a company sitting on $4 billion in cash. The stock ended yesterday at $136 a share, or $86 billion market cap. And yet we have all kinds of issues facing property managers with this company. We have the extenuating circumstances, which they can just literally cancel for any reason 24 hours prior to arrival. You have review scores, which if you're a host, you can manipulate, beg your way to a better review score at a property manager level. It's based on the entire group of properties instead of just individuals. So it's very, very difficult to compete with host. They have a real problem with taxation. In other words, they're filing it anonymously, which is a big problem for property managers, because that means we have to double pay. And then in many cases, they're regulating and they're lobbying for shared housing at the expense of whole home inventory, and advocating to, you know, cities that they should allow shared housing and zone out whole home housing. So my question to you, I'm going to start first with Amy, is why? I mean, we've been in this industry for a long time. It used to be industry leaders, industry coalitions got together and advocated OTAs about what they needed for them to change. And there's been so much silence right now on Airbnb. Why are property managers not unified in going after Airbnb on some of these issues, which make them a very difficult and in some cases anti-industry company?
I don't know. Short answer, I really don't know. We were so much more unified as an industry when we saw this type of behavior with TripAdvisor and then with HomeAway. And we had an ability in our industry to push back. We haven't been able to do that with Airbnb. They're not their executive team hasn't been really visible. They're not hanging out with us. We don't get a chance to have those conversations like we have in the past with other OTAs. I also, you think about, and I'm better at asking questions than answering them, as you know, but like, how much of your inventory is on Airbnb?
Well, we talked about this with Jed Kelly 2 episodes ago. We have all of our inventory on Airbnb, and we just had a conversation about the billboard effect. And what we do with Airbnb is we understand that they are not an easy OTA. And so we mark them up. We mark them up 15%. They're not happy about that at all. But the reason why we mark them up 15% is we have to pay taxes. So we have to mark them up for that. Also the paying issues with Airbnb. So that's how we've gotten around it. And they do bring in a different customer base, and we do everything we can to get the customer information so that in the future we can market to that customer directly.
Yeah, I mean, Amber and I've had a lot of conversations, especially recently, about Airbnb. I don't think that, I think for a long time, actually, for years, we've been talking about how challenging they've been to partner with, not just internally, not just for a company, but also for as an industry, and what they've done, in terms of regulations. It's hard for me to understand why we allowed them to be at the level they are with vacation rental inventory. They were never the best partner, but everyone just started drifting over there. Even the holdouts are there now. So I know there's pressure from homeowners, but we were in a really good market with a lot of demand. So it's baffling to me.
Amber, what are your thoughts? You've been in the industry as long as me and Amy. Why is there either silence about Airbnb or a lack of unity getting the industry to clean up some of the bad behavior by Airbnb? They are worth so much money now. There's no reason why we can't be unified.
I think it's a couple different factors. I think part of it is that even though Airbnb is evolving, it's still a very small percentage of everyone's overall bookings. It is growing this year, but it's also, in the past you brought up TripAdvisor, Amy, and I think that's a great point, but they weren't the merchant of record. And so we all, to be honest, had the guts, and they weren't driving that much of our bookings. And so we had the guts to pull our inventory. Nobody's had the guts to pull their inventory. And I think that that's been mainly because, to be honest, VRBO fell off the face of the earth this year in a lot of markets. So now you're dependent on other channels because, especially for property managers that don't have a really strong direct booking strategy, they depended on the channels. And so in a year where your VRBO revenue has tanked, Airbnb is a panacea, right? So also they have more control because they're the merchant of record. So when you have the money, you have more control. But I think it's also that the industry is very fragmented right now. People are choosing sides. People are, there's kind of a new wave of property managers that, have very low number of inventory. So they're a very small voice. A lot of the, Amy, you've been giving out the awards, the Pioneer Awards. A lot of the people that had the guts to stand up and change the industry are retired. They're gone.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the property managers that are some of them have quite a loud voice in the industry, are incredibly small, and they only come from a world with channels. They started their business on Airbnb or VRBO. So they don't have any other version of the world to turn to. They've always put up with whatever those channels threw at them.
Yeah, we also had a pipeline of other alternatives. You know what I mean? As someone was going out, somebody else was coming in. So there was like, okay, let's all go over here. There's not really anyone waiting in the wings to be the next Airbnb or the next Vrbo right now.
So Miriam, I'm curious, you're a little bit different generation. You probably get your news and information like some of the newcomers that we've seen who tend to dominate social media platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, and a bunch of them come out with podcasts. I'm curious, where do you get your information about the industry? And is it just that it's so fragmented, or that these voices that kind of dominate the conversation are just so newbie, they don't understand how it's critically important for this industry to work together, and that you can't, to make changes, you have to be able to talk in a real way and talk about problems and talk about companies that are bad apples? Is that part of the problem, that all this whitewashing where we can't say negative things, that it's counterproductive to moving the industry forward?
Well, so there's three parts, right? People get in their feelings. Everyone gets their feelings hurt. So you have that. But two, it's also the generational gap. VRBO didn't fall off. It came to a society where the younger generation is who is booking, and they are not using VRBO. So I make the comment, a lot of times with like the Tennessee market during, our fall times, it's newlyweds and nearly deads. But that's the generation with Airbnb and VRBO, right? The nearly deads are who is booking on VRBO. That's why there's that gap. The newlyweds, my generation, I'm booking on Airbnb. Two reasons for that. One, I can cancel my reservation, and when I show up, if I'm not happy, I get a full refund. I'm done. But two, it's, if you look at it, and I brought this up, I think, in our first podcast, look who is being the head runner for Airbnb. Patrick Mahomes, Jason Kelsey, and Travis Kelsey both have a podcast now. Both of them, in their last two podcasts, brought up their Airbnb stays. That is what the generation of who's spending money right now, that's where they're booking. And so, look, and you're right.
Yeah, I think the generation I agree with you, Miriam, I really do. But like when you say Airbnb right now, it's kind of like saying Uber. It could be a Lyft. You know what I mean? Absolutely. Like I don't know that, as the younger group comes out, I think they do know there are other places to book them. But I think everybody calls it that now, just like you would call an Uber, a Lyft, an Uber.
No, I don't disagree. But if you look at the format, and if you pull that information, and I'm sure Amber can or even has, look at the gap of the age reference that is booking on Airbnb, whatever you want to call it. And why are they doing that? I think that is what we go back to. But the alignment, and it all goes back to, no one in the industry right now is aligned, because like Steve said, if you look at it, everyone is on different scales. Is it because it's a younger generation that is owning property managers who started out with Airbnbs or being on VRBO? Now they are property managers. That is their bread and butter.
Because they only came from a world where they started on channels. We all started on direct bookings.
Correct.
And then added channels. They start on channels. But I will say one thing, that's what I meant by VRBO dropping off. There's a million reasons why it's dropped off in markets, but they haven't kept up with their marketing. It's hipper to say Airbnb. Like, they totally lost a lot of their momentum. But what's interesting to me is even some of these fresh voices, I think that's what they call themselves, are really upset about VRBO's recent policy changes. So while they don't push back on Airbnb very publicly, several of them have come out very publicly, and kudos to them. I think that maybe this is the catalyst we all needed to get back on the same page, but it definitely is a difference in, where you started in the industry, and if you started with the channels or you started with direct bookings.
Yeah, I think the destination matters too. Like, if you are in a market with a lot of repeat guests where you've got to drive to and people come there a lot, like the people that go to Destin go to Destin. You know what I mean? They know who's there. Gatlinburg has got a lot of repeat business. Gulf Shores, where I am, has a ton of, repeat business. Like, those people have options. It's like, if I'm going to get a short-term rental in Cleveland, Ohio, where else am I going to go but Airbnb?
But there's also this, I think Miriam brought up a good point about trust. And Miriam is taking the view of the customer and saying, like, Airbnb is very customer centric. She trusts that channel to take care of her as a customer. And so again, they can only do that because they're the merchant of record. And not to be controversial, because you know that I'm a shy person, but I actually think Airbnb is doing a very good job in some aspects. Like, I think they're waffling a little bit. Like they said they were going back to their shared and focusing on shared spaces, but their recent ads that they just put out this week are all about the whole home against hotels, which has been really interesting. So I think they're still trying to figure themselves out. They may not be a startup, but they definitely have not figured out who they are yet in the marketplace.
Yeah, I completely agree. They're market driven stuff. I mean, they're stuff that's driven for the public environment. You know, it cracks me up that everything is about shared spaces and community. And it's like there's the Airbnb they want to be, the aspirational Airbnb with experiences and everyone living like a local and all this stuff. And everyone
But we make them all the money.
Yeah, and then but their marketing goes to where the money is. Exactly. It's like it's revenue generation. I don't think they like it.
It's been easy. They've done great in an easy market. So again, let's see what they do the next couple of years, because I could have sold a dumpster in the parking lot of my office right now the past 2 years for a stay, right? Let's see what Airbnb does. Do they go back and they transition? Where does that business come from? Do we do it direct? Do we do it on channels? It's up in the air. It's a different market.
I mean, to your point about the generational difference, I do agree that your generation is driven towards large brands. I think we see it with Amazon. I think we see it across the board. I'm not sure that the next generation behind you, though, is not much more locally driven.
The markup and the fees that those channels charge on their own, as long as that generation's fine with paying 30 to 50% more for the same stay they could get buying direct. I mean, I use Amazon because it's easy, but it's also the best price usually. And if it's not, I don't buy it on Amazon. So that's what I think Airbnb and these channels haven't figured out is at some point people care about what's in their wallet, especially as the economy changes, and the best price will always be direct.
It may be higher, but if I get there and I don't like something, I still get to stay. And my washer didn't work and it ruined my stay and I get a full refund and there we are, because that's what Airbnb does.
Our other appetizers are starting to get cold. We could talk about Airbnb all day. I do think this generational issue is a real problem in terms of having real talk. I know Amy and I were on a webinar with one of these Gen Z podcaster, and he said, bring straight fire. And then I brought straight fire, and they couldn't handle it. So it's just a generational issue that's going to have to be solved one way or another, because you're not going to be able to get Airbnb to be a better player if you don't have a unified voice and if you're not willing to take a stand. But on to the next appetizer. That one kind of left my stomach turn, but here's another one. Hopefully this will be better. So Amy, maybe I'm remembering it more fondly, and Amber, but there used to be better choices for enterprise software. And I'm just baffled at how we're in a place right now where the choices of enterprise software are so limited and there's just so much unhappiness with them. I mean, when I started, Escapia had just come out. It was an extremely powerful property management system. Chris Kemp, who became CTO of NASA, Melissa Yang, who was co-founder of Tusia. I mean, they were behind this. This was state of the art. Then Instant Software started to develop V12, which was later acquired by HomeAway, and they continued to advance it until they sold to Expedia. And there were other companies like RealPage, which was a multi-billion-dollar company that had bought Kigo and was going to expand Kigo. And all of this stuff is in the rearview mirror. And now in the US market for enterprise systems, you've got Track TNS, you've got Streamline, and both companies have announced layoffs, reorganization. There's the long-awaited debut of Guesty in the US market, but that hasn't really happened in the trust account states. So Amy, I'm just curious what has happened, because I think this has been a real problem for this industry, that the bench of enterprise software systems is so small.
I mean, just to be completely blunt, private equity kills technology in our industry. I mean, every single time. The only question is, how long does it take to do it? You know, like every roll up, I mean, whether it's RealPage or whether it was the HomeAway roll up of software, or whether it's some of the newer ones, for risk of being too controversial for this generation. Like it just, yeah. I mean, once the innovation, you know, the young companies are scrappy and they're innovating and they're having fun with it and they're listening to their customers, and then the money rolls in, and then it's a different game. And we watch it all the time. And I think what's also interesting, in the roll-up scenario, for some reason, they always pick the weaker software to go with. It blows me away how this happens. It's like, you know, they'll buy, like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 platforms, and then they'll start trying to move people, you know, to one or the other and kind of pick a winner. And it just seems like every single time the private equity company or the roll-up picks a winner, it's the one that was actually the weaker software.
That's because they don't evaluate it based on the merits of the software. It's some CTO that looks at which programming language he's most comfortable in, what he has the most resources and the strength in his programming languages, and tends to pick the software that matches that without any regard for functionality.
You know, historically, we've had new companies coming up while, you know, companies are losing their market share at the top. And right now, like you said, outside of Guesty pushing into the US, we really don't see that pipeline filling up at the bottom. Unless you think that hostfully, arguably, owner res, some of these can actually transition to enterprise.
My take is that really, if you were truly a PMS company, is your opportunity at the enterprise level? I wouldn't be investing in enterprise, because there's not enough enterprise companies. There's not enough runway for them to make it worth it to make that investment, when all of the PMs, I think it's like over 75% or less than 200 units. So
the running joke in our industry is that everyone who knows how to build software is smart enough not to.
It's considered commodity software, right? So it's what I have to use to turn on my lights, but I don't like to spend a ton of money on it, right? But then the requirements that they have to build are the widest of any platform in the industry, right? It has to do more than anyone could ever imagine, but no one wants to pay for it. So that's part of the problem. But also, what I find interesting with companies like Hostfully or OwnerRes or some of these smaller ones is that because they're not burdened with some of the enterprise needs, they're innovating on things that we also wish we could have at the enterprise level, but they're getting them done because their roadmap isn't burdened by some of the enterprise needs. So they have functionality that the enterprise systems don't have, which is amazing.
Well, you know, one of the challenges that I'm sure everybody's aware of is how important enterprise customers need trust accounting. And there's states where trust accounting is part of the real estate law, and you have to follow that trust accounting and your trust account. And that's been the biggest problem. That's the biggest cost. And then, of course, North Carolina has completely different trust accounting rules than any other state, and it's very complicated. But Miriam, I know you've taken a look at a couple different systems. You were on Escapia with David Agati and Wes Melton when you were with Smoky Mountain, and then we were on V12, and now we're on Track TNS. And I think you've seen firsthand that software system has some pretty significant limitations compared to the other two.
This is where I would be like, I need a drink in our appetizer meal. No, I listen, and I'm not a fan of Track. I think that, like, we had really no other options. Do I think Track does have some good stuff for us? Absolutely. I'll agree with Amber, which is kind of shocking because sometimes we don't, right? I think that the smaller CSMs look better. The smaller stuff, what they are able to automate, looks a lot better than even what Track is doing. Definitely not impressed so far. We've been on it for over a year. I mean, it's what we have. It's what everyone works on daily. But it sucks that we have multiple people in our industry, or not really industry, but in our organization that have to add data to it, pull stuff. I mean, Amber works a ton on that. Chad works a ton on migrating stuff in and out. where we pay for a software, then a lot of that should flow through, in my opinion, right? So I like Escapia, but that's me.
I think all of the systems, I've used all of them too, as you know, Steve, Escapia, V12. I've used even other ones. First Resort. I might have used a tape chart for half a minute. Who knows? We might have used the wall. And just to clear the air, I'm only 43. So Miriam, how old are you? I think I'm not sure we have a generational gap. I think we might have different points of view because I accidentally started at 20. But I think we might be in the same generation. But
no, we're not.
Oh, are you in your 20s?
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that Track actually has a lot of features to it that are incredible. And in fact, what it feels like to me is that it's so flexible, it's easy to break, and it's trying to do too many things at once. And there's just too much flexibility in it. So I think that's one of the things that make it the hardest.
Well, we could talk about the software situation longer, but I'm not sure that appetizer was a good one either. It's
that was kind of hurt my stomach. Like, we're going to change some stuff up because damn, that was tough.
All right. Well, this is one that the waiter recommended. So it's Marriott Homes and Villas. So I put this on here because Marriott trades at a $58 billion market cap compared to Airbnb, which is a $92 billion market cap. And I think back when Marriott announced they were getting to homes and villas, we thought, okay, this would be a real legitimate thing for Marriott and would really drive the needle for the industry as an alternative place for listing our inventory. And I think there was a lot of hope. And you had Jenny Shea from Marriott Homes and Village go to a lot of conferences and get to speak for free as a keynote. And there were all these promises. And I was listening at the Skiff conference, and to date, they're at 115,000 listings. That is it, compared to Airbnb, which is 6 million listings. And she said, Marriott wants to be the best. And I am just so confused because they were on two of our markets that we inherited, and the numbers that they were producing for Tybee and Carolina Retreat were abysmal. So we disconnected the feed from Marriott Homes and Villas. But my question to you, Amy, is does Marriott Homes and Villas, who does Marriott Home and Villas remind you more of, TripAdvisor or Pertinier?
Ooh, I forgot about Pertinier. Maybe old school One Fine Stay before the latest iteration. I think, wow, that was a blast from the past. One of the things oh my gosh, Jeremy was amazing.
He's awesome.
It was great because what Pertinier said was all you had to do to get your social media improved was get a lot of likes. And so they were farming out likes to India, which actually penalized companies and their social media page. It was unbelievable what happened to companies who practice this drive likes and were being paid for these likes coming then from overseas markets like India or Pakistan.
Well, it worked until it didn't. It didn't say he was white hat. But I think that we really, I was looking forward to Homes and Villas, when they came in. I certainly wanted to see what was going to happen, with that platform. I think we all, kind of thought it would be a place for luxury, right? Like luxury rentals and be able to drive, revenue there. And it seems like there's a conflict with what they want for their brand and what they want for growth.
I totally agree with you. In the beginning, it was actually very successful for me in the Palm Springs market in one of my previous lives. And I can tell you that at the time when they first rolled out, they would send someone down from Marriott to inspect every property to make sure it qualified. And I think that was their original vision and model. And it wasn't about volume. It was about brand match, etc. it's very hard to grow that, right? I totally understand COVID interrupted it, etc. But I do think there's certain markets where it probably works very well. I'm being controversial, and I'm going to say I still have hope for them, and I'm not a fan with the right market fit and the right inventory fit.
I'm probably never going to have another job if I'll ever get fired from V-Trips, because I'm like, they suck, and they suck.
Miriam was turned off by Marriott Home and Villas when they came up to Gatlinburg and said, we need to put blackout curtains in the cabins.
Oh God, I was done. I literally walked out. I mean, I didn't make it past that. Mountains.
All right. Heather is going to bring some sorbet because we're going to go to our main course now. So I know everyone is looking forward to the main course. Miriam's got some water. That's great. Hydration, it's important. So, all right. So the main course, everyone's waiting for this. This one will be very tasty. It's Vacasa. So Vacasa closed yesterday at 46 cents a share. Their 52-week high was $4.05, and their 52-week low is 40 cents. So they're pretty close to their low. They announced a reverse stock merger at 20-1 to get them over $1 a share, which is the minimum of NASDAQ requirement. And so today they're valued around $200 million. And this is a company that went out at a $4 billion market cap. In April 2021, they did a merger with Turnkey VR, and Turnkey took $574 million, almost 95% of it in stock. That now translates to 5 cents on the dollar, or 26 million. So not a good day for Turnkey shareholders. And I could go any way possible, but Amy, the thing that just is incredible to me is the industry says we should not say critical things about a competitor like Vacasa, yet they're a publicly traded company. They claim that they're a better company, that they do a better job than property managers. They've publicly said this. They've put it out on podcast, and yet they only do 30% direct. So why are people not being more critical about Turnkey? Because it is really Turnkey. It actually is Turnkey. It's Turnkey 2.0. Vacasa, why are people being more critical of Vacasa? It is a dumpster fire.
I mean, I think across the board, the industry has wussed out in the last 4 years to discuss anything. And it's frustrating. It's part of the reason the VRM Intel is where it is right now. Like, there's just not a lot of appetite for having those kind of conversations. It's frustrating to me, obviously. I think there's this thought process in the industry right now that about Vacasa, that nobody needs Vacasa to fail. It's bad for the industry. We don't need to say anything. Our saying anything isn't going to determine whether or not Vacasa succeeds or fails. Like, our having a discussion about it and kind of looking at what's going on there is not going to make or break. The company is not going to do better if we never say anything bad about them. So it's frustrating to me that we can't have these conversations about it, mainly because we need to look at what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong so that other companies don't do the same thing in the future. Kind of like the private equity with the software companies. I think that with Vacasa right now, I mean, that it is Turnkey 2.0. I mean, whether or not, there were some Turnkey had a very different model, than Vacasa did. Whatever you want to say about Eric Breon and Cliff, they did bootstrap that for a while, and before they took on funding, and they did clean toilets and things like that, kind of like you, Steve. I mean, I think that the 1-20 split I thought was pretty extreme. I didn't expect that. I thought we might see a 1-10, 15-1, 10-1, that kind of thing. But that was surprising to me, and I don't know what that accomplishes for them long term. They've got to be looking for a buyer, right? I mean, is there anything else they can do right now?
Well, I've predicted that they would sell for a while I'm surprised they haven't. But the question I think is that private equity is looking at is what is really the value of Vacasa? Because typically in a situation like this, where the capital debt is very expensive, right? So what's happened over the past 2-3 years is because of interest rates, the cost of capital has increased significantly. And then the source of capital has shrunk. So most regional banks are no longer lending. After that Silicon Valley Bank failure and others, a lot of their balance sheets are messed up. And then the bond market is pretty much shut down. So really venture equity is the only place left. And they have a lot of places to go. And some of those are people that are companies that desperately need cash because they have negative burn rates. So the cost of equity is very high. And so they look at a company like Vacasa, which has been burning cash. And I know that they're claiming they're going to be profitable this year, but they're nowhere near profitable enough for a venture firm to come in and pay them a significant amount of money to do this. Because I mean, there's a lot of risk with Vacasa. And the biggest risk, I think, is that their inventory is shrinking. I know that their CFO, who left or was asked to leave, said that they have a churn rate of 20%. And if they're no longer doing M&A, which they haven't done for over a year, if you're doing 20% churn on 44,000 units, you potentially are going to have a negative situation with unit count the next time they report unit count, which they have not done for a while. So Amber, my question to you is, same as Amy, why are industry leaders not talking about Vacasa? Because there should be a discussion about Vacasa. There's a lot of things that are wrong there. It's given the industry a bad name. And I don't know why we should be told on social media that we should only say positive things about our competition.
There's two different things. And I include myself in this. Sometimes it's hard because a lot of the people at Vacasa is not just the C-suite, right? Vacasa is not some, logo out there to beat up. A lot of the people that are grinding day to day are people even I've worked with. A lot of these people have, it's a company of acquisition. And so it's very hard to beat up people that are trying really hard. I think, Steve, part of the problem is a conversation no one's having. And instead of making it personal, I think what is wrong with that Vacasa model is why I took this job. Because I think any company, I've seen it with Resort Quest, Lucadia, Gaylord, I've already seen the story so many different times. And Miriam, to be honest, you picked up on this. It's about a consistent guest experience across the board. But most of all, I think the secret sauce is not losing the local connection. I mean, I think our approach of keeping the local brands, keeping the local teams, everything changes a little bit, but I don't think that scales in our industry. It just doesn't do as well. Even in Europe, the brands that get very big tend to be more of marketing channels. They're not the boots on the ground, dealing with the guests, dealing with the owner. I just haven't seen it work, and I've seen things go much better. Is it perfect? No. But I think that's the conversation that makes sense to me. Does this model work? How many more times are we going to watch this model fail and then act surprised that it doesn't work? But I think people don't want to have the conversation in the context and it's not just us. I think in general, I think people don't know what to talk about. Why is it failing? Right? How do we, I think the better conversation is, how do we scale? It's really hard. But I think one of the things every model I've seen has missed is, if you think of Marriott, like we talked about this a little bit, when they were focused on their brand promise and who they were, it works. They go for luxury, homes, luxury experiences. That model was working. When they tried to scale it, it's starting to crumble a little bit. And Miriam's generation uses Airbnb because she wants to trust that when she's staying, that if it's not a good experience, she gets her money back. People follow brands that they trust, and that starts with the guest experience. At our core, I'm in technology. I'm digging in data, all of those things, but at our core, nothing I do is going to overcome whether or not we provide a good guest and owner experience.
You guys are at the size now that you're going to be getting the same scrutiny. And I mean, I'm starting to do that now. There aren't as many people. If I were still writing, I certainly would have been writing a little bit more about what's going on at V-Trips. I think that the question is, I mean, does it scale, right? I mean, are we able to get a national brand that actually has meaning in this industry? And I mean, what, for example, like the question on churn, Steve, what should their churn be?
Well, a couple things to unpack, and I'm going to let Miriam talk about the local experience in a second, but historically churn is about 15%. And that's a historical number. Now, the difference in 2023 is the number one reason why you would have churn is the sale of a property. And the sale of properties right now has significantly decreased. So, our churn is going to be lower than that 15% number, or what we call attrition, for lack of a better word. The attrition is going to be lower than that by a significant amount. And that's because real estate sales have declined. That's the number one area where you're going to lose a potential owner. Now, hopefully you win them back, but there's always a risk. So the question is, why would Vacasa's CFO come out and say that churn was higher than anticipated or budgeted or forecasted? It's because what Amber just said, they're not an operationally centric company or even a guest centric company. I mean, they've talked publicly about being a technology company. And the sin of all of this, what started with the hiring of technology people on the C team and a board of directors that said they were a technology company. This is a hospitality space. So in terms of V-Trips, I mean, I certainly can say, I'm the owner founder. I started with one property. You're right. I did clean toilets, not my funnest job, but I understand at least the hospitality business. I understand the guest journey. I also think I can talk in a serious way about technology. So Amber and I can actually have conversations that are productive. Sometimes we don't agree, like her and Miriam, but sometimes we agree, and we can actually talk about resources and priorities and things like that. And then more importantly, as a CEO, which it is complex and it's hard, but at least I have enough experience where I can help guide the company. I mean, I'm not an outsider. I didn't come in here and parachute in for a big paycheck. I'm here because I think I can build something that can be lasting. You can email us at straightfirevr@gmail.com or go to our website, straightfirevr.com. Thank you again, everyone.